Hello, everyone, and welcome to another presidential podcast from SOFIA, the Society of Presidential Historians in Academia. I am Dinos Garros, and if you are interested in SOFIA, you can go to the website sophiascholars.com or just scan the QR code on your screen. Today, we are very happy to have with us uh, Elizabeth Denham, and she is going to talk about a very interesting article she wrote about the 1968 presidential election. And so, since she can do a better job of talking about herself than I can, I'm going to let you come right in now, Elizabeth, and welcome. And please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. I am really happy to be here. My name is Elizabeth Bryant Denham. I am a Holocaust historian by trade. I teach at Houston City College, where I have been for the past 8 years. And this project on Pegasus that we'll be talking about today is something I got interested in as an undergraduate at Florida State University. I had taken a class on the 1960s with Professor Peter Ripley. And when he talked about a pig running for president, my friends and I just thought it was something that was so incredible that it became kind of a side passion project for me. So.
That's great, and this is a good example that I tell people all the time. I say that the more we dig, the more we realize how much we don't know than how much we do know. So my confession is I had never heard of Pegasus until your article, and it's a little embarrassing because I'm a presidential historian and I know a lot of things about the 1968 election. There's a lot of fascinating twists and turns. And I think it helps to prove the theory that no matter how much you read history, if you've actually lived through it, you kind of remember some of the little details more vividly. So in 1968, I had already been born, but I was barely out of diapers, so I certainly had no concept of presidential elections. So I don't remember that. So when I read this, I learned something new. So thank you for teaching me about Pegasus. But give us a little summary of who Pegasus was and who named him and who endorsed him, for lack of a better term, and what his role was in the election.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the best way to do this is a picture turning on the evening news back in 1968 and see a pig running for president. This is not a cartoon. This is not some sort of joke headline. It is a real pig. A squealing, struggling
Mhm.
145-pound hog named Pegasus J. Pig or Pegasus the Immortal. He is going to be the presidential candidate of the Youth International Party, better known as the Yippies. So, for a few surreal minutes in Chicago, police officers are going to wrestle a pig in front of television cameras, while activists are going to shout that democracy itself had become livestock. It sounds absurd, but in 1968, politics was absurd. And Pegasus is going to really capture the anger, fear, and dark humor of this younger generation. So, to understand why a pig could become a political symbol, we have to step into the United States in 1968. 1968 wasn't just an election year, it was a year that felt like the country might break apart. The Vietnam War was escalating. Every night, Americans watched footage of jungles burning and body counts climbing. Young men were being drafted, and protest movements were spreading across college campuses. At home, the civil rights movement was colliding with police violence. Cities were erupting after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in April. Then in June, Robert Kennedy was murdered just after winning the California Democratic primary. Two assassinations, a war abroad, and riots that are going on at home. There were Americans who genuinely feared the outbreak of another civil war. And the presidential race is going to reflect that tension. At the Republican convention, Richard Nixon promises law and order and, quote, an honorable peace in Vietnam. He appealed to what he called the silent majority, Americans who were exhausted by this chaos and protest. The Democratic Party, meanwhile, looked like it was tearing itself apart. Many men were vying for the nomination. George McGovern, Eugene McCarthy, Hubert Humphrey, and Robert Kennedy before his death. The party's base was fractured between anti-war activists and establishment loyalists. So, for many young Americans, the choices in this election felt empty. They did not want to vote for the lesser of two evils. They wanted a candidate that actually spoke to their anger and their sense that the entire political system was broken. That's where the Yippies came in. The Youth International Party, or Yippies, wasn't a traditional political organization. It was part protest movement, part counterculture circus, and part performance art. There were no membership cards, no dues, no ideology test. If you said you were a Yippie, you were one. People could protest their own issue. The Yippie movement is going to be shaped by Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, and Paul Krasner, who were activists who believed that American politics had already become theater. They believed that campaigns were staged. They believed that these nominating conventions were spectacles. They believed that television decided reality. So their strategy was simple. If politics was theater, they wanted to put on a better show. Their stage would be the 1968 Democratic National Convention taking place in Chicago from August 26th to 29th. So while party leaders met inside to choose a nominee, the Yippies planned a rival event outside the convention halls, which they called their Festival of Life. The plan was to feature music, street theater, public gatherings, and what they described as a celebration of youth culture. Bands were invited. Even Janis Joplin at one point was scheduled to play at this festival. And underground newspapers throughout the United States spread the word. Activists across the country began preparing for this pilgrimage to Chicago. So, going into this, their message was meant to be half protest and half carnival. And public officials are going to be terrified. Chicago Mayor Richard Daley had no intention of letting his city become a national symbol of disorder. Only a few months earlier, riots after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination had shaken the city. Daley wanted the Democratic Convention to project strength and control. And he had already given the shoot to kill speech to the Chicago Police Department earlier that year. So Daley denied protest permits. He said he was going to enforce strict park curfews where no protester would be allowed after 11 p.m. Requests for sleeping areas were rejected. Negotiations are going to stall. And the Yippies are going to interpret Daley's stance as a dare. If the city tried to silence them, they would become louder. By late August, thousands of young people arrived in Chicago. About 150 distinct groups are coming to the city and making plans to protest. No one knows the exact number, but some estimates hovered around 10,000 people. This was a marked difference than what had happened at the Republican nominating convention, which was held earlier that year. The idea behind this is because most of these protesters didn't believe that the Republicans would listen to them at all. They're still hoping to shape the Democratic Party. They're hoping to be heard. So these protesters come from New York, California, the Midwest, they're students, they're activists, they're drifters, they're idealists. And as Hoffman said, we encourage everything. Now, not all of these protesters are going to agree on tactics. Some want peaceful protest, others are going to be ready for a confrontation. Most simply wanted to be a part of history. So, as the convention grew near, Chicago felt electric. There was a heavy police presence and helicopters overhead. Crowds gathered in parks, and rumors are going to spread faster than facts. And in the middle of this tension, the Yippies prepared their boldest act of political theater. They would nominate a pig for president. The symbolism behind this choice was deliberate. Political cartoonists had long portrayed corrupt politicians as pigs. The Yippies argued that both major parties were already run by pigs, greedy, bloated, and disconnected from ordinary people. For the Black Panther Party, the term pig referred to the police. So they would nominate an actual pig. In their minds, no matter who won the election, a pig would be in the White House. Finding the right pig became an argument that revealed a split inside this movement. Abby Hoffman initially bought a small pig that was cute, manageable, and almost lovable. Jerry Rubin hated it. Too adorable, he said. Too safe. Rubin wanted a pig that represented power and ugliness, something that forced confrontation. He toured hog farms searching for the perfect symbol and finally chose a 6-month-old 145-pound black and white pig. They named him Pegasus the Immortal, or Pegasus J. Pig. For Rubin, the Democrats nominated their presidential candidate, and he eats the people. He said, "We nominate our candidate, and we eat him." So Pegasus would run on a platform of quote unquote garbage, a reflection of what they believed American politics already was. Pegasus would also endorse the Yippies' 18-point platform, including the freeing of Black Panther Party leader Huey P. Newton, and they pushed for an immediate end to the war in Vietnam. So the Yippies scheduled his announcement for the presidency for August 23rd of 1968. On that day, reporters gathered expecting a stunt. Instead, they got a spectacle. Television crews set up cameras. Microphones crowded the stage. Police surrounded the area, already suspicious that something illegal was about to happen. Rubin stepped forward and began. "Today is a historic day for America." Then he raised his voice above the noise. "We are proud to announce the declaration of candidacy for the presidency of the United States of America by a pig." Before he could finish, officers surged forward. Chaos exploded. Rubin was grabbed. Activists were tackled. Folk singer Phil Ochs was arrested. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras shook as police waded in the crowd. And at the center of it all, officers arrested Pegasus. This image is surreal. We see police arresting a pig while protesters chanted that the system had arrested its own reflection. The Yippies could not have designed a more perfect scene. Across the country, viewers saw a pig being hauled away by law enforcement. The protesters looked ridiculous, but oddly harmless. They were certainly not the street thugs that Daley had portrayed. In contrast, the police looked rigid and humorless. It was slapstick, layered over a very real political crisis. And this contrast became the story. As the Democratic convention opened, tensions escalated throughout Chicago. Protesters gathered in parks, police enforced curfews, tear gas drifted through the air. Night after night, clashes erupted. Officers beat demonstrators and sometimes reporters in full view of television cameras. So millions of Americans watched the violence unfold during the evening news. And these images shocked the nation. In the middle of that brutality, Pegasus lingered in public memory as a strange counterpoint, a reminder that the protest movement wasn't just rage, it was satire. It was youth refusing to treat politics with solemn respect when they believed that it had become morally bankrupt. The Yippies themselves urged followers to avoid escalating violence. Their strategy depended on media optics. As long as they appeared theatrical rather than dangerous, they could claim the moral high ground. And Pegasus helped them to do exactly that. The Yippies never expected to win the election. Their goal was exposure. They wanted America to see what they called a police state in action. Chicago provided a stage, and television broadcast it nationwide. When the convention ended, the Democratic Party emerged deeply divided. Many liberals felt betrayed when Hubert Humphrey, tied closely to the Johnson administration and the Vietnam War, secured the nomination. The party looked fractured. The streets looked unstable. Richard Nixon presented himself as the candidate of calm and order, and he won the presidency that November. Now, whether the Yippies indirectly helped that outcome remains debated. Some argue the chaos pushed moderate voters towards Nixon, but others believe the protest exposed necessary truths about power and repression in the United States during this time. But what's undeniable is that political culture had changed. The Yippies turned protest into performance. They weaponized humor. They understood television before most politicians did. And they forced Americans to confront uncomfortable truths through spectacle. Now, after Chicago, Pegasus's candidacy continued in spirit. The Yippies held gatherings they called picnics. They fed crowds ham sandwiches. They handed out buttons and balloons. And they promised to inaugurate Pegasus as the only honest presidential candidate in America. What's really interesting is that his appeal was global. Live pigs appeared in anti-war demonstrations as far away as London and Montreal. Pegasus became less of an animal and more of a symbol, a mascot of disillusionment, a joke that wasn't really a joke. Because behind the laughter was a generation asking whether democracy still worked for them. So, in the end, Pegasus never delivered a speech, never debated policy, never shook a voter's hand. But he remains one of, at least in my opinion, the most memorable presidential candidates in American history. Not because he almost won, but because he exposed how many Americans believed the system itself had become absurd. In 1968, when faith in politics was collapsing, a group of young radicals answered despair with satire. They ran Pegasus not just to mock the election, but to say something deeper. If politics had become theater, then the audience had the right to laugh. And for a moment in Chicago, a squealing pig told the truth in a way that no politician could.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry. Did you conclude?
Yes, I mean, I do have a little side note that after his
Sure.
arrest,
Mm-hmm.
and Pegasus may have actually been a girl. This is some new information that I came
I
across.
see. Okay.
But after Pegasus' arrest, there was a rumor that permeated Chicago that the police had killed Pegasus and barbecued him. But the reality does not seem to be that interesting. It seems like Pegasus was sent to an animal sanctuary where he or she lived out their lives.
Okay, well, actually, that was going to be my first question because I'm having this image of Pegasus being hauled away, and I'm thinking, okay, so whatever happened to the pig? But thank you for that, and thank you for really bringing history to life. Upon having read your article some time ago, I went on YouTube and I looked up Pegasus and I saw Pegasus and I saw some of the footage and. There's certainly an argument to be made. I agree with you that the Yippies and Pegasus may have been instrumental to some extent because Nixon Humphrey was a rather close election. It wasn't like 72 when Nixon won 49 out of 50 states over George McGovern. 68 was a lot closer. It also brought to mind, and this is a much smaller scale than Pegasus, but it brought to mind the 1988 campaign between George H.W. Bush, the father, and Michael Dukakis, the Democratic candidate. Bush was the Republican. Bush really did not have much respect for debates. He thought they were a dog and pony show. So at one of his rallies, a guy dressed up like a chicken and started heckling Bush. And you see this back and forth with Bush arguing with a chicken, and it didn't particularly make him look good in that moment. But in any event, I'm not sure if it was now that I think of it, if it was 88 or 92, but it was definitely one of his runs. But I remember the imagery. So, um, what got you interested in, I mean, I understand now why you chose Pegasus because of your class on the 1960s, but you really dug deep and very thoroughly into the 68 election, which was indeed fraught with all sorts of twists and turns, very unusual from an incumbent saying, I'm not going to run again, to the other party's nominee who had ran as the candidate and lost and was renominated 8 years later to the assassinations. And so there certainly was a lot there. Um, but you mentioned, I thought it was important that you mentioned the Yippies platform. So they were basically they weren't apolitical, they were political, and they were more left of center sympathizers than right of center. So I think what you were saying is they pretty much had no hope that the Republicans would see eye to eye with them, and they were disappointed that the particular Democrats didn't either. And so they figured this was the route to go.
Yeah, so I mean, in addition to wanting the Black Panther parties, Huey P. Newton Freed, in addition to wanting an end to the war in Vietnam, they're also going to be pushing for things like prison reform. You know, they found a lot of problems within society that they just felt like the establishment was not speaking to.
Right. Have you done any other research on this type of thing after Pegasus, or was that basically the one election and the one role and the one situation of the unorthodox presidential candidate, so to speak?
In terms of the 1968 election, I mean, I've written a couple of papers about the trial of the Chicago Eight just
Hmm.
because there's so many different groups that are coming together. But the president that I'm most familiar with is Franklin D. Roosevelt. My PhD focused on his presidency and the role of a Jewish leader in New York, Stephen Wise,
Hmm.
and how they worked together during the Holocaust.
I see. Okay, well that inter would make another great interview in and of itself. Well, I'd like to thank you. Like I said, I did not jump in because you were just flowing so well and telling the story, bringing it to life, and I'm very happy you did. And I encourage everyone to go take a look at well the article itself is in the Florida Conference of Historian Annals, Volume 18, March 2011. And you could do what I did, jump on YouTube and see Pegasus for yourself. So we thank again Dr. Elizabeth Denham for being here today. And again, those of you interested in Sophia, you can scan the QR code or just jump on the website. Thank you.